Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's New Hampshire Business Review webinar, Is Your Surveillance System a Hacking Vulnerability? I'm Ernesto Burden, the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review. Today's webinar is sponsored by Trusted Internet, and we will not delay. Let's jump right in to introducing our panelists. Leading off is Trusted Internet's founder and CEO, Jeff Stutzman. Jeff, want to jump in here and let's introduce your team.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. This is Jeff Stutzman, CEO of Trusted Internet. So let me start at the top. Nate Paddock, retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, used to run the Air Force's Security Operations Center. Adam John, top right. Adam has been with us only for a few weeks, but until then, he was a Chief Information Security Officer for a contractor in DC and an Information System Security Officer for the Center of Medicare and Medicaid, overseeing assessments for all of the Medicare and Medicaid system. Lou Saviano, bottom left. Lou had been a CIO at Sylvania, moved on to Textron, and then he and I became friends when he was the CIO and Chief Information Security Officer for. Is a retired Army guy, and he's a PhD at the University of Arizona. Paul teaches and runs a cyber program for the University of Arizona. So that's
Jeff,
my team.
we're really looking forward to this. I just want to remind the audience that there's a Q&A function below, so please do type in your questions. We'll be taking questions at the end if you guys do it.
Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Get up on the big screen here. This is a deck that we give often, and this is my favorite slide because people don't realize the internet is really polluted, right? When you go out in the internet, it's like swimming in a polluted swimming pool. And with business surveillance systems, it's even a bigger deal because you've got insecure hardware. The maintenance ports are left open so the companies can reach out and touch them. Poor asset management, lack of patches and updates, unencrypted communications, just so many things associated with the business surveillance systems that you work with on a regular basis. You wouldn't think that these things would be so insecure, but they are. What can happen? Ransomware, identity theft, a launching point for other attacks, surveillance, or you just get a trusted computer in your own network that can be used to hack you. So this is what we see when we walk into most businesses or homes or whatever, but it's an internet connection, a modem, and then this can be either a wireless or a switch or something. But here's the bottom line. We see this in almost every environment that we walk into before we start doing work. This is an unprotected environment. I know that the cable companies will tell you that they protect you, but this is not a protected environment. How do we know? We put a firewall right here, and we listen and we protect, and this is what we see. Extra slide. This is actually my source of the internet's polluted, right? This is one of many sources. So you can see about 49% of the internet traffic today is something called a botnet, a robot network. It's basically a high-speed thing that you pull the trigger and it just goes into the internet and it spreads things all over the world, never ever comes back. They just keep getting dumped into the internet. They're going to continue to run around the world looking for computers that they know how to break into, and then they do. So about 49% of the traffic is automated botnets. About 25% is bad, right? Bad. And then the rest of it's human activity. So it's a little frightening to think that 50%, 51% of the activity on the internet is generated by humans. The rest of it's generated by robot networks. And here's what we know. Those things are going to deliver things that you really don't want to know about. Ransomware, eavesdropping tools, extortion, privacy invasions, and tools to target others, corporate networks, child pornography, and human exploitation. I could go on, but this is what we see, right? I took this at 10:07 a.m. off of our own analytic tools. This is a portfolio of about 150 firewalls that we monitor across the board. And what you're looking at is right off the bat, the number one thing, and I did a week just to show you, in a week's time, we had 1,848 scanners come through looking for Hikvision security cameras that they can automatically break into and start sending information home. So what does that mean? 1,848 times across our portfolio of firewalls, we saw something trying to find and break into Hikvision cameras. Hikvision cameras represent 1 out of every 5 security camera anywhere in the world. They're that big. So vendors that you know and love to use Hikvision cameras. Let's just go down the line. I mean, there are others. Botnet, Zero Access, started as a crypto miner, now it's an information stealer. Blattabindi. If you're one of these people that likes to store your credentials in a web browser, Blattabindi is going to steal it from you. GhostRat. GhostRat is a remote access Trojan that was used by the Chinese for stealing information for a very long time. Now it's automated. I'm going to come down here. Androx Ghost, another credential stealer. System BC is a backdoor that somebody in Tor, the dark web behind Tor, can use your computer to push ransomware to somebody else in a ransomware as a service schema. And Mirai, we all know about Mirai. That's the one that took down Dyn a few years back. And then I just highlighted a couple here, right? This is looking for a Netgear device. And if you like to buy those cheap wireless from Best Buy, the TP Links, this thing's looking for TP Links. But right off the bat, this is something that you need to know. The number one thing that we see searched for every week, and I could do this any day, and I love doing this, is looking for Hikvision security cameras. This is what the output of a credential stealer looks like. Now I've sanitized this, right? I don't want to do that, but it comes out in human readable form. This is pretty cool stuff. This is an older one, but this is what it looks like when one of those other things reaches in and steals credentials. So now, homes and businesses are targeted equally for surveillance systems, right? And the government actually just did this thing called Section 8089. It actually came out as an interim rule in 2019 and just became finalized. But they now say if you take federal dollars, you cannot buy one of these cameras or one of the others. I think there are a couple of others on the list. You cannot buy or use these Chinese-made cameras because they've got back doors. And so that's government contractors, defense contractors, grant recipients can't use the money to buy these Chinese manufactured cameras. This is a really big deal. So look, before I turn over to the team, right? Their internet, it's like swimming in dirty water. Just be smart, be informed, and be protected. It's all because of this architecture. So I'm going to go around the room, and I'm going to start with Nate Paddock, right? So Nate's been with us from the start, and one of the things that we talk about a lot is there's a huge biotech presence in Manchester now. And we got some really cool stuff going on, aerospace manufacturers. Nate, what are your thoughts on these compromised business surveillance systems or the attempts to compromise business surveillance systems in New Hampshire companies?
Well, I think the most important thing to keep in mind when it comes to a camera surveillance system is where did you get this system? And if you're purchasing a new system, it's really important to research who is selling it, what is the reputation of that company, is it on the covered list, that brand, is it on the covered list of the Secure Networks Act? Because if it is, you don't want to get it. And the problem is that some of these systems are actually white labeled as a new brand. They're rebranded, but the underlying technology could be Chinese technology, which the federal government through the FCC has been trying to ban from sale in the United States. So it's important, even if you're checking out like Amazon, for example, there are a lot of no-name brands and cheap camera systems out there. You want to avoid those because you don't know what kind of support you're going to get, and you don't know what the actual technology is, the chips in the system are coming from.
What about places like, I mean, the Manchester airport, right? Huge municipality, lots of sensors, lots of cameras, lots of security. I mean, apparently, I mean, these guys are gonna have to probably do a rip and replace, I'm thinking. What are your thoughts there? That's a big job.
Well, one of my top recommendations for any business of that size, even down to homes, is really you need to prefer a wired system over a wireless system. One that can't be jammed because Wi-Fi can go down, Wi-Fi can be jammed by other frequencies, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And especially in an airport space, there's a lot of frequencies being used between the tower and the aircraft and other communication systems around an airport.
And so Adam, you just started with us coming out of the healthcare space from Hopkins to CMS. What implication does this have in the healthcare space?
I mean, it could be massive. Obviously, you have the PHI issues and PII issues. So
What's
if it's,
PHI and PII?
so protected health information. So PII is personally identifiable information, like your driver's ID, your name could be, even HHS says your email is PII, which is maybe a little over the top, but it's basically something that could identify you somewhere being tied to something. PHI is something to do with medical. So it's usually two pieces of information linked that say this person either has a diagnosis, it could be their insurance carrier, something that ties into medical information. And medical information obviously is a bigger deal. I mean, you can get a new credit card if it gets hacked, but you can't change your genetics, right?
You're thinking
So,
the surveillance systems are definitely an issue with privacy information.
absolutely. I mean, they could be reading, some of these things are very, very powerful in HD. They could be reading the sheets, you know, in real time, recording that for later. They could be looking at the patients walking by. You know, some of them, they could run it through an AI bot and like they have in Vegas or whatever, and actually see if they can recognize people. That could be used for blackmail. That could be used to breach data, breach information, which again, healthcare breaches are on average about $11 million now. So, and that's per breach, and that's over doubled in the past 2 years. Again, also going laterally, right? So they get into your camera systems. If they go laterally, and healthcare systems have modalities, right? One of the systems that a hospital used to work in was an MRI scanner that was from 1984, and finding someone that knew that version of Linux was always a fun thing to do, but amazingly vulnerable system, right? And a lot of people, these smaller systems, these smaller locations don't have the network that's broken up into smaller segments to actually help protect them at all. So these modalities will be owned, and again, your breach, you know, is just getting worse and worse and worse, and you may not even be able to monitor those systems to know it's happened.
What about the HIPAA? I mean, there's got to be a huge compliance component to this, right?
That is, yes. So HIPAA, you got to be monitoring your things, right? It's if HIPAA has a reputation that people say it's kind of do this something. Well, NIST came out and said about 178 controls of their 853 series are applicable. Do those, and make sure you do the regular risk assessments to make sure you're, you know, closing that loop to get more better at your security posture. Your risk appetite, right, gets lower, so that you know it's monitored, you know it's happening, you know, like these cameras like we're talking about that are owned, it's prescriptive. You got to know it's happening there. That's part of the control sets, right? What's happening, who's logging into them, did you change the core base passwords, right? If anyone goes to Google and says, this types what's the factory password for a Hikvision camera, it's going to tell you, I think it's 12345, which is the same luggage, you know, combination on my luggage. So you got to do these basic hygiene things, and if you don't, OCR is going to get involved, and it's going to get real messy. You're going to get in a wall of shame, which nobody wants to go. Your insurance rates will go up. A lot of times, insurance is going to say,
So is this one of those things that gets audited as part of a HIPAA audit?
an assessment. Yes, yeah. So it should be part of your assessment. Your annual. If you have a third party and they're not asking this stuff, you got to find a new group. So yeah, but yeah, you don't want to get in a wall of shame, right? And if you get breached, I guarantee you,
What is the wall of shame?
well, if you go to the Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights, you just Google HHS Wall of Shame. It's a website that has a list of every breach that has more than 500 people involved, 500 patients involved, and it will tell you who did it, what happened, how many people were affected, and what date.
Yeah,
And
so this is something that you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago, where it's not just a matter of a privacy breach. They're also openly publishing what happened and who you are.
Yep.
Right? They're putting the name out there in the wall of shame. Lou, talk to me about risk and reward in the camera space. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? There's a big price tag, right?
Yes, and I don't think businesses are aware of how this changes dynamics as far as traditionally always had business working with IT, and there was always a difference in communication, and a lot of the work of a CISO, and companies like us was to try to make sure the business was in sync with IT. Once you do surveillance, a lot of that is controlled by people do physical security, or could be facilities. So down that these people, now you have a third major stakeholder, and they don't have the same practices or how they control these risks, or maybe not aware of it. So as a business, you really need to understand, do these major parties meet what your risk acceptance levels are? And in fact, as a business, do you really understand, have you communicated what is your risk acceptance? I mean, what level of risk are you willing to take? What level of risk can you not take because maybe of compliance? And the more people in your organization that are not in sync with you, this is what we find out when we go to customers. And that's a lot of our role, is really just to get people together and say, you either have a low, medium, or high level of tolerance. And when we audit you or do these assessments, 99% of the time, then they don't meet those levels.
And the camera systems, Celia, it sounds like it's an easy way in,
Oh yeah.
and it's a very high impact.
Plus, what you've done is everybody understands now that a computer can be hacked, and then therefore, but all devices are now computers, IoT, the Internet of Things. So now surveillance camera is on the internet, it's on a network. Therefore, that means a surveillance camera can be hacked. So you've just expanded your attack surface. Now, does your security and your risk management, your policies, does your business understand the level of risk they're taking with these surveillance cameras? And many companies don't.
And it's a huge risk. I've just shown you that
Yeah.
a lot of
And
it's
then,
audited,
and
right?
does that person that manages the cameras, are they patching it? They're managing it? Do they have a backup? All the best practices IT has developed over the years. Do we have this in the surveillance space? Usually don't, and that's why we have a high rate of breaking into these camera systems, because set it and forget it, default passwords, not patched.
Yeah, so you know what? I'm gonna bring up one of my favorite topics with Nate, because this is a conversation we've had a lot of times, right? So Nate, you know that I hate the term and I hate the practice of port forwarding. Can you please talk a little bit about what port forwarding is and what the issue is?
Yes. So many times the network video recorder for the camera system is local within the business. And the way that these are designed, they do not have a high level of security most often. It's simply accessed via a username and password. And anyone who has a camera system like this wants to be able to check it. If you're using a mobile app, for example, and this often applies to residential clients too, the mobile app needs a port forward to access that camera system that's on the network. The port forward is essentially a hole that's poked in the security perimeter of your network, so that anyone, not just your mobile app, but anyone who targets your network with that username and password can get in and view the video feeds. They can even change settings on the network video recorder once they're in, because usually your credentials are administrative level credentials, not user level. So there's a very good risk that if you're using port forwarding Yeah, and we have actually seen this, unfortunately. That video feed will get accessed and it can actually be sold. It can be sold to subscribers by a third party that you don't want watching your video feed.
So, I mean, we know that this is a really dangerous practice. We also know that this is what we see on almost every install, right? I'm just curious. I mean, what should an installer or a chief security officer, what should they be thinking about here?
Well, I'd like to ask for some of Paul's advice on this. He's one of our,
Paul's not here, is he? I don't see
yes,
him on our list.
Paul Wagner.
Yeah, he didn't make it in.
He's here.
Oh, Paul, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, I didn't see you on my directory there. Oh,
So,
well,
and the
welcome.
reason,
I'm
so the
sorry,
reason I want
yeah.
to mention Paul, so Paul has been our lead installer for quite a few clients, and we're talking about very high net worth families. We're talking about people in LA. We're talking about high, just if you hear the names, you know them immediately. Basically heiresses and heirs and oil and gas giants and everything else. So
Paul takes care of billionaire families.
he does.
Just leave it at that. Really well-known billionaire families. Paul, what are your thoughts on this port forwarding practice that we're talking about? And I'm
Yeah, so
sorry, I didn't see you on my participants list, so I apologize.
no, it's all good. So I think there's a couple of factors that go into that. One is when you talk about maybe not the high net worth individuals, but celebrity individuals, people whose lives are completely in the spotlight, everything is there. And then how do you take that person's identity, their public persona, and alter that? So it makes them a huge target, which means that more people are trying to get to that information. The other part of it is, especially, it's definitely generational, but depending on that generation, when your entire life is on social media or being pushed out to these different profiles, you can get a little bit lackadaisical in, well, that is my life. That is how I operate. That's my persona. So it's kind of a seamless transition between what we have in our physical space and then what we capture through surveillance, through videos, through TikTok, through whatever it is, whatever that medium is, and then posting it out there. But because your identity, some of your revenue, what you're getting paid for as an endorser or whatever like that, you have to have that information out there. So that's the other piece too, is really getting them to understand that risk from a business perspective, even though it's your personal life that's kind of going through that process. And that's a hard distinction to make because kids are one of those things where you grew up with technology, almost a cell phone in your fan. It's like you're born and here's your cell phone and good luck with life,
We
right?
just, so we just accept the risk in the compromise of their surveillance? I mean, that's what we're talking about is these surveillance systems. Do we just accept that because it is what it is?
Well, no, I mean, well, there's always the acceptance of some level of risk, but I think it's more of the understanding what the risk is and then putting mitigations in place to do that, where and it becomes a cost thing. So if Paul loses a cell phone, we're talking that's $1,000 loss ish. That that means something to Paul. Where if you're a billionaire, $1,000 loss of a dice is like, oh, I'll just get a new one. Who cares? And that acceptance is there, but what was on that phone? What was on that device? Was it protected? What kind of information is out there? So
Sure, but I need you to bring this back to the cameras in the homes.
okay. Yeah. So cameras in the homes, when we put those kind of pieces in there, especially when we're walking into it, is one, how many are there and what's watching? So we're talking about things that they don't even know are watching them. So that's if you have like Google devices, your surveillance system, any like logging into the keypad where it actually now has facial recognition to say, are you the person that's turning off your alarm? There's so much in that ecosystem that's watching us. And a lot of times we don't even know that that's there. Like, where is that camera? Are we covering up the camera on our devices, on our things like that? So I think it's understanding what's in the home, what's in the system, putting the protections in place. And then once it leaves the home, because it's connecting to some cloud-based system, then what? Are we protecting it as it's going to that cloud-based resource? And then are we accepting the risk of that company protecting our data once it's out of our hands?
And what do you think about this in the EDU space? I mean, we've got FERPA regulations, just like HIPAA.
Yeah, so I think that's an excellent point. So I did a little bit of kind of digging into what this looks like in New Hampshire specifically, and over 10% of the population is in the K-12 space, whether you're a student or you're a teacher within that space. Last year, at least 2 school districts were breached, and I think it was funny. One of the somebody that was interviewed says, "Oh, it's just kids trying to hack the system, trying to get a rise out of somebody." It's like, well, if that's the attitude that we're going to have to a breach of the data, do we understand the risk of what's going on? And then when you look at what is the risk in a K-12 space, or even in a higher education kind of space, is people don't realize, I think, that they're major corporations. So University of Arizona is a $1 billion corporation, but do we treat it like a Fortune 500 company? No, it's a university, right? So when we look at the K-12 space, that becomes another issue. But you give the kids credit card information, well, your credit card information, because they have to buy food. You give their healthcare records when they sign up for it. You give all of these pieces of information, and it's a huge risk because typically, especially in rural areas for rural schools, they don't have the security staff to protect this. They're very low budgets, that kind of thing. And then the cameras that are associated with that as well is like, who knows if they're there or what's going on. But the other piece is, how many cameras are on a school campus that we don't even realize? And I'm talking about like the cell phone in people's phone or in their pockets. They're walking around with surveillance devices, taking pictures of everything, copying everything that's happening. But what's in the background that they're taking? Are they giving, you don't give permission anymore. Like if somebody's walking down the hall, live streaming their movements through the hall, your privacy's been violated without you even knowing it. And it's all probably being live streamed real time of what's going on. So
And
it's
we
kind of
could
a
make
crazy
the same
space.
argument. Yeah, we could make that same argument in any corporation, right? That's a really good valid point. I mean, yeah, that's a great point. So Lou, what are your thoughts about this in the corporate world? I mean, what are we thinking about there for, we've already talked about the risk, but Paul brings up a really good point about being able to see what's going on, see what's in the background. Should we be thinking about those kinds of things? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I believe the points Paul made are excellent as far as, remember, we can give 100% security as long as the business wants zero functionality. So the business, whether they realize it or not, every time they accept a new, like a surveillance camera or a new project or not your revenue system in the cloud, they're implementing a functionality and increasing a certain level of risk. And when they do that, they need to understand, just like Paul said, as far as the camera systems, what's being captured. If your company has some kind of information that's in the physical office, you've just given me ability to understand the layout of that building. Or if there's certain people there would be a high target, whether you believe they are or not, CEOs, CFOs, they are. And then I now understand that the CFO's office is in the back of the building, the furthest away from an escape exit area. By just that simple surveillance camera, that's someone with that phone. You've helped me profile that. And there's a certain level of risk that your company is accepting when they do that. So it's not a set and forget it. And what Nate said earlier too, these cameras, remember thinking about our risk assessment, did you go in and turn things off on those cameras? Like IT people turn off certain functionality of servers if it doesn't need to be connected to the web. Are we doing that in a surveillance camera so you don't have all this extra functionality turned on, all this additional risk without the business knowing it? And who's making those decisions? That's one of the biggest holes we see today with these camera systems. They shouldn't have this ability to talk to each other. So then if that camera system's collecting data, is it talking to a smart device that's going out into the internet? And then this is the bad part when we come in afterwards and do an assessment, say, this is how the data got out.
Yeah. So that really leads me into the next, topic. I think one of the hardest things is how do you protect against this, right? So we've got a reference architecture. And one of the things that you guys hear me talk about all the time is isolating the environment from the internet or the internet from the environment, right? So we put a firewall in place. But Nate, take a minute, talk about how we architect to be able to protect against some of these threats. And in fact, one of the things that I forgot to cover is, forced encryption, right? When you look at these you look at the ads for a lot of these technologies, they all say that they're forced SSL, right? They're encrypted at rest and encrypted in motion. And then you think about, the fact that you've got a network video recorder, for example, that's got a couple of hundred cameras that are connected to it. And that drive cannot be encrypted 100% of the time, because you got to decrypt to write that frame at 60 frames per second to that drive, right? So in effect, it becomes a largely unencrypted environment. But they take a second and talk about the thinking behind how we architect, or how somebody should architect their environment to help make these cameras safe.
Thank you, Jeff. So I think the cornerstone of the architecture is what our company does. We work hand in hand with your IT provider, and we will install, as Jeff mentioned, a next generation firewall. We're going to take a look at what the architecture of the network is, and what we want to do is isolate the network being used by the camera system and put that configure that onto the firewall as its own network, apart from the network you're using for email and for communications within the company. We want this on its own network, and we monitor that with a 24-hour security operations center. What that lets us do is, even if there's a port forward, we can see what data is coming in and who is trying to access that system, because the firewall will monitor the traffic going in and out of the network. That permits us to increase the security mitigations as needed by blocking, say, for example, and we've seen this, where if the camera system is already hacked and it's sending beacon signals out to a server in Taiwan or in some part of China, those servers will respond. And when the firewall sees the response from those servers, we now have the IP address of those incoming transmissions, those acknowledgements, and we can block those and then prevent communications to that. And that lets us then inform you of a possible compromise in your system. The basic mitigators that we will go over with your IT provider include changing the default passwords. They include critical updates, checking for the firmware and software patches for your security system frequently. And whenever a new patch comes out, it needs to be applied as soon as possible. And then, of course, two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, as well as named accounts for any of the administrators for that network.
And isolation from the internet. So I think one of the really important pieces here is that, you buy these firewalls, whether we do it or somebody else does it, doesn't really matter at this point, but you buy a firewall and they've got, 5 or 7 or 10 different features built into this firewall. So we can actually mitigate that direct hole through what they're calling the port forward, right? So instead of, just drilling a hole through this firewall, think of the firewall as a chain link fence, right? We have to open a door to let something come through, and then behind that door we've got the bouncer, we've got the dog, and we've got the the sniffers and all of those kinds of things that are running, so we can mitigate, or you as a business owner or an IT director have the opportunity to mitigate some of that port forwarding by using other layers in defenses. All right, so Ernesto, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you for some questions of my team and I. I think we've got about 20 minutes left, so I think that's probably pretty good time for Q&A.
Awesome. Well, this has been fascinating so far, although as always, whenever I talk to you, Jeff, it's kind of terrifying, and I'm left uneasy for the rest of the day. So, but what that did make me think, and the first question that I really wanted to ask is, there are probably things that I'm doing every day that both in business and in my personal life that are, like many other people are doing, that are just not good ideas from a security perspective. So I was wondering if you could give us 5 to 10 of the most common mistakes you think people are doing habitually day to day from a security perspective, and what should they do instead?
Who wants to take that one? Paul?
So I'll jump in with a couple right off the bat. I think it's starting with awareness. So we've used the term hygiene, right? So we get up, take a shower, brush our teeth, do those kind of things. Safety, we embed that with kids, like crossing the street, put your helmet on, wear a seatbelt. All of these things kind of get ingrained in us, but a security standpoint isn't. So those basic fundamental pieces that we look at are starting with passwords. Do you use password reuse? We see that across businesses, personal, like Paul's password for trusted internet, Paul's password for university, Paul's password for, and I keep using that, but I'm using a different password for everything. Well, systems that can crack the password know how to do that. They know how humans think, and they do it instantaneously. So those are the kind of pieces that we want to look at, that password management. We want to know what is important to us in our lives, whether that's grandma's secret recipe for apple pie, or if it's pictures of the kids or whatever that is, and how are we protecting those things? Where are we putting them? What are we transmitting? Another one is, are we oversharing? And I think that's really a challenge for kids as they get on social media and that kind of stuff. Not only are they sharing it, but then are they going to regret what they shared 20, 30 years ago? You did something stupid back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It's a story. It's not something that gets repeated and pushed out and all those kind of things. So I think that oversharing piece. And then one last thing is just understanding who you're interacting with online. So we think that we're talking to Paul or Jeff or somebody else, when is it really them? So looking at our phone messages, our phishing email messages and stuff like that, and taking a little diligence to look at it, like, does it pass the smell factor? It just doesn't seem right. Well, then don't click on it. Don't respond to it. Don't engage with it. Fear is a huge motivator for people. It's like, hey, your warranty is about to expire. It probably isn't, right? Like, call the company, look at it, kind of be aware of what's going on. Don't do that initial reaction of like, it's expiring, let me take care of this kind of thing. So, and there's many more, but I think those are some of the top ones.
So I want to get more from the rest of the team, but before we move on, taking each one of those in order, the hygiene one is a great one. Password reuse. I know I was guilty of that for years. I had like 3 that I could remember. And but what should people do instead? Because our brains are not good at remembering long strings of random alphanumeric content. So what do people do?
Yeah, so a password manager is something that we recommend highly. One of the things that it's actually freeing. And I get made fun of because it's like, why don't you remember that password? I'm like, because I don't have to. I remember this really one long password, and then the machine does it for me. And that's kind of a liberating thing, is like, so what was the password for this? It's like, no, I just need that one. So password manager is the critical thing to kind of go with. It offshores all of that. Yes, you're kind of that single point of failure piece, but that's huge.
And it will create individual complex passwords for everything. You just don't have to think about those. One of the other things that we're starting to see more and more of are passwordless systems, right? So we actually built out a VPN where, a lot of people don't use VPNs because the 2-factor authentication is very cumbersome on a telephone, right? And so we went down and built a passwordless VPN. You push the button, it's on. You push the button, it's off. So there are technical things that are coming down that are going to help us fix that.
With the password, storage systems, what are some that you guys see that you like? I know LastPass, that's the one I use, but
We like LastPass, and LastPass had some troubles a couple of years ago, and everybody said, "You still like LastPass?" And I said, companies who get outed in the news for having a security issue always come out stronger. And so that's what we stuck with it. We have a lot of folks that use 1Password as well. Those seem to be the 2 big ones that we run into.
do you see a lot of companies enacting policies around having to use strong passwords for their employees and password managers?
Yeah, good question. right? When we get there, I mean, they all understand the need, but in almost every case, we see password reuse across the board. Yeah,
Or
Right.
password.
Adam, go ahead, Adam. You're ready to explode.
It's also password notepads, right? Or password post-it notes all over the screen. I've seen that so many times in my past years. I did want to, just because I'm ADHD, I just want to add one thing. People just, so if you want to realize, I just did a quick search while we were all talking. And according to Shodan, if you don't know what that is, you can look it up. There's currently 2.7 million Hikvision cameras on the internet right now
Yeah.
available. And anyone can hit them.
Hmm.
So again, things like UPnP, like Nate had said, your hygiene practice. A lot of cameras come with UPnP turned on. Universal plug and play. Well, that means your camera can talk to your TV. That's nice, but anyone who's on your network can look at your cameras.
So this is right up the, this I think is a big one in the question you're asking, Ernesto, is, this is probably one that you've never heard of before. And it's widely available and exploitable in a lot of the homes that we go into, right? So, everybody's got, Ring cameras or Nest cameras or whatever, and usually those are pretty good, but a lot of these scanners were kicked off because we had such consumer grade, hardware, and there are lots of ways to break into those, and we start seeing them. And you don't think about that, or you don't think about the fact that your Internet of Things devices in your home or your office. I mean, this is both, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. These things are all vulnerable. You wouldn't have any idea that these things are vulnerable. And so let's just talk about, it used to be you'd go to work and you knew that work was going to be targeted because at the time you would go out and you'd buy a block of addresses from your provider, from your internet provider, and you'd have those block of addresses that were dedicated to your company. And, then you'd go home at night and you'd have a dynamic addressing, or, and your address would change periodically, and you didn't have to think about it so much because you knew that we were going to be targeted at work and we had people there that were protecting us, like us. And you'd go home and, you just didn't think about that, right? So what's happening now is because so much of the traffic on the internet is automated. It doesn't matter whether you're at home or at work, you're being hit by almost exactly the same things. So, this is one of those things where, as a business owner, I mean, I am a business owner, and I think about this all the time, right? I don't want to be hacked, and as a homeowner, I don't want my family to be hacked, but I know that the minute my daughters go out on the internet, they're swimming in that polluted pool. And so there are very basic things that you're going to want to do. Passwords. Change your passwords. Keep your machines up to date. Use the automated update features. One of the things that you're not going to like hearing from me is you must have a firewall. You must have a firewall in your home. Now, you could use something like us, and we have corporate stuff, and we protect executive homes and high net worth families, and those are commercial grade expert level tools. You can also go and buy these little $100 firewall appliances, and some of those you're going to like and some you're not. They consume a lot of bandwidth. They make your network slower, but they do protect you, and they're cheap. And that's definitely a consumer grade option that's managed from your phone. But you've got to be able to isolate your internet in your office, in your business, in your home. You've got to be able to isolate those networks from that dirty, septic filled internet swimming pool. And if you don't, you're going to get sick.
Do you have any, you have any brand recommendations for the 100, maybe not $100, but for a consumer grade firewall? If
Yeah,
somebody,
I just gave you one. There's a little firewall, and I tested one, and they're, they do. You're going to get overwhelmed with alerts. So this is one of the things where, with us, we have a program where you can you could call in and talk to one of our executive cyber support teams, right? We can put stuff like this in place and you can ask questions of them. But these little firewall devices you can get, and they're not bad. And the alerts are going to come to your phone. And it used to be, you know, you get up you get a pop-up on your computer and say, do you want to allow this? And you'd say, no. Are you sure you don't want to allow this? No. Are you sure? And finally, you just click yes. And that's what happens with these firewall boxes. You get overwhelmed with the number of requests to the point where it's just ineffective. And so that's where folks like us come in. We just have experts that monitor these things and answer those questions for you and do that. So we use FortiGate firewalls. It's an expert level tool. If you're technically inclined and you want to learn, use a FortiGate firewall. It's very fast. It's not going to reduce your bandwidth. You're going to need to get up that learning curve very quick, or you could go the firewall option and you could plug something like that in. There are a couple of them. That's the one I see most. But you're going to have to learn what you can allow and what you can't.
Okay, I do want to, there were some questions from the audience in the Q&A. A couple of them have been answered in typing, but I want to share them with everybody else. One was a question related to what we were talking about before. The question was specifically, if browser password utilities are discouraged, how does an ordinary business person maintain their password list securely? And we did cover that pretty explicitly here with password managers like LastPass, Keeper, 1Password, etc. And I think that does underscore that a browser password utility is not a password manager.
Yeah, and I see this next question. What about iris scanners? And so I'm going to just say, how many irises do you have? Right? How many unique irises do you have? 2, maybe 1. I don't know. I'm not an ophthalmologist, but on the back end, where's your iris stored, and how fast are you going to lose it? So I love the biometric options. I don't necessarily like the way that they're stored, because we don't even know where they're stored. Right? So is your iris print being stored in a cloud somewhere that's been secured, or is it being pumped off to some no-name data center? I don't know. We don't know. So that's what I think about.
There's also things like passwordless things like YubiKeys. They call them FIDO2. It's a little token, and you use UFC on your phone. You touch it for a fingerprint, so it's 2-factor on itself. It's something you have, it's something you are. I kind of like those a little better. That's where a lot of that's what Google, that's what Microsoft uses, and then that's how they keep themselves mostly secure. I'm just gonna laugh. I said Microsoft, but yeah, that's what a lot of companies are going to. So instead of using the password, using the other 2 factors that you could possibly use.
Yeah,
That's
and
not
I
going to
would
help
add
on a camera system, though. Your surveillance system, but yeah.
Yeah.
I would add that at the business level, the iris scanning systems can be very expensive.
Yep.
And also tedious to maintain.
Okay. So that we had as the first 3 of the top 5 common mistakes that we got were hygiene and oversharing and understanding who you're interacting with online. Anything else to say about oversharing? Because that seems like a symptom of our times. Everybody, you were talking about live streaming earlier in a dorm room, but really people are taking pictures everywhere. And I always wonder when people take pictures on vacation and post them while they're still on vacation.
Yeah,
They're
that tells
inviting.
where you are. Or just shoulder surfing, right? How many people use privacy screens? I mean, use a privacy screen. But oversharing is a big deal. Yeah, you're on vacation. Hey, look where we are. This means my house in New Hampshire is empty. Help yourself.
Plus, at the
Right.
surveillance cameras, people they still think that it's very blurred and you can't zoom in. I was at a local airport in New England, and we zoomed right up on someone's phone, saw them entering their password username. So think of that in businesses or in general. A lot of these high-end camera systems, 4K, 8K, you can see that now. Or think at home. You got a home office, and you got all these IoT surveillance, all these camera systems, TVs, etc. So I'm just taking and monitoring all day as you type in your username and password. And once a hacker comes in, he has you. And remember too, you're not always the target. It could be your kids, could be your neighbor. And that's some of the dangers of these systems. Very high quality video, and people still think it isn't. The other piece is, remember, anything that's free means you're the product. So these apps you're loading, are these tools, are you go into Dunkin' Donuts and use the free Wi-Fi? That means you're sharing the information, you're sharing your photos, you know, their camera systems, how secure are they? So you got to start thinking, you want to download an app, pay a couple extra dollars, you know what? You usually get the security. So is security worth $2, $3?
Mm,
Yeah, Tim just had a really good question too. He's asking about DNS services. So Tim, one of the services that we love on a FortiGate is the DNS filtering and DNS monitoring. So DNS is basically a domain name service. It's like the internet's telephone book. So you want to go to Google, you look up google.com and it says 8.8.8.8 or the other addresses, whatever it is, and every single thing. So if you're going to go to Amazon, you've got to find a way to look up the number, the address that Amazon is associated with. So one of the things that we don't do is we don't do web monitoring because it's very subjective, even for the machines. But the intel on DNS monitoring is very clear. So either we see it going to someplace bad, we know that the lookup is looking up an address that we know that's bad based on, you know, the enormous amount of intelligence that's out there, or it's not. And so we use DNS monitoring and DNS filtering a lot. We do have a lot of folks that use OpenDNS. Cloudflare is popular. For us, we just use the one that's built into the FortiGate because we don't have to pay anything extra for the license. So
another question that came up as you guys were presenting was, what overall have you seen is, you know, I think AI has been around a lot longer than people have been talking about AI, you know, and I think it's become much more of a public consciousness thing since generative AI. But presumably it is continuing to improve and be more available to more people, probably including bad actors. So what's been the impact of AI in general on internet security?
yeah, I'm going to take that one myself. I just got quoted yesterday in MSSP alert, right? We're on their top 250 list, so I get the questions sometimes. But here's what I think is happening: we're going to see a tsunami of AI attacks coming in. But don't think for a second that the security defenders don't have AI either. And so we may have a little bit of a gap. And you know, there's always a gap between attack and defense because you've got to play a little bit of catch up, right? It's easier to attack than it is to defend. But I think what's going to happen is we're going to see this happen. We're going to see, and we see some of it now. You can use AI to do videos, you know, calls into a bank, things like that, and then the attacks are going to become smarter. But right now, we see, I mean, AI is not always right. And so if we're going to see an AI generated attack, there's a high probability that the attack is going to make a mistake because it's pulling data from a lot of data and it doesn't necessarily know whether that data is right. So the thinking is, at least my thinking is, when it's pulling from data that's an unknown blob, the attack is probably going to be incorrect in one way or another, just like a human would make a typo in doing an attack. And we'll catch that in our defenses. As that gets better and those mistakes start to smooth out, I think at the same time, defender tools are going to be going through the same process. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a drop in security, and I think we're going to rapidly catch up. And I think we'll be in a pretty even footing going forward. One of the things that I know though is when we have some tools that have AI built in. And I'm going to say AI in the form of machine learning, because one of the things I don't want to do is be able to capture firewall data from Yankee Publishing, for example, push that to Chat GPT and have somebody else get that in an answer when they ask a question. right? There's a huge privacy concern with AI that we haven't really considered. So we prefer to think of it in terms of machine learning. I want the machine to get as fast and as smart as possible without a lot of those mistakes, and we can teach it, and that's the approach that we take. But it just means that we have to have a smarter SOC. So where most of our security operations centers have tier one, basic triage. Tier two is more advanced technically. Tier three is more, intelligence and geopolitical and soft science focused. It just means that as we have more AI in the defense side, our SOC costs are going to get more expensive because the triage is handled by AI. And we've got to have more technically savvy people to really understand what's going on below.
All right. Well, I feel reassured somehow by the notion that the defenders are using it as avidly as the attackers. I think that would be a great way to look at AI more broadly, is that all the problems it's going to create will also be problems that perhaps we can use.
It's a two-sided coin.
So last question, we're almost out of time. This is a little bit of a personal question, but I suspect that it will apply to a lot of people out there. You've identified browser password tools as poor, password managers is the ideal thing to go. Where does Apple's password management ecosystem fall within that? Do you trust it?
I don't.
You don't.
So if somebody compromises your computer, I already showed you what the output looks like. Look, Apple's got some good stuff, but and I'm I'm a Mac, except for my phone. But I don't trust any of those, right? I want to have a little bit better control. I like the way Apple does it. But is it perfect? No.
Makes
Anybody?
sense.
Yeah. I love my Macs and I won't give them up, but I just I don't trust anymore. Anybody else have a thought on that? Because you guys know I'm a bit of a zealot.
Yes. So, just this week, there was a huge breach reported by Dell Computers. And for the past 6 months, Microsoft has been dealing with a terrible breach of CEO, like not CEO, but C-suite officers in Microsoft having their email accounts hacked, and federal officials having their email accounts hacked due to poor and lax security practices on the part of Microsoft. And I think that,
And
even
this
this
has been in
year,
the news since about November, I think, right?
I'm certain we're going to see an Apple breach very soon. Despite the security controls that they've been hustling to implement, they've already had a pretty big scare this year about how Face ID can easily be manipulated on a stolen phone to access everything on the iPhone user's phone just by changing the face to the criminal that stole the phone. And as much as, Jeff said he likes the way, the keychain stored in the cloud, that's a good idea in conceptually, but how well is it secured, and how well can you trust the iCloud keychain? It's only as good as the password and the protective measures being currently put in place, which are pretty basic.
The hearts of all of our Apple audience members just sank, but it's super good to know. And this has been tremendously helpful. So I want to thank you, Jeff, Nate, Adam, Lou, Paul, the team from Trusted Internet. Thank you for
Always a
sponsoring.
pleasure.
Thank you for presenting, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. This will be available as a recording later. I think this is one you're going to want to share, not only with the folks who are handling IT in your company, but this is really something that the C-suite should see as well. So we appreciate you being here, and have a great rest of the day.
Have a great day.